Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wasting Time with Sir Isla. Today we are going to talk about the barriers that hinder intercultural communication. So let us talk about the barriers that hinder intercultural communication. We have 6. Those are anxiety, assuming similarities instead of difference, ethnocentrism, stereotypes and prejudice, nonverbal misinterpretation, and language. We are going to discuss the first 4, whereas nonverbal communication and language will be discussed in another video. Let us start. First, let us talk about how anxiety serves as a hindrance in intercultural communication. When you are anxious or worried because of not knowing what you are expected to do in another place or culture, it is only natural to focus on the feeling of anxiety itself and not be totally present in the communication transaction. For example, when you attend another school for the first time, it is natural that you feel anxious because you do not know anyone in your new school. You may feel conscious and out of place. Feeling highly anxious will make you do common mistakes and appear awkward to others. You will also have some hesitations in migrating to another country that does not speak your language because it is just natural for you to be anxious as to how to communicate with the locals. The second one is we assume similarity instead of differences. If we do not feel anxious about going to a new place, we commit the blunder of assuming that their culture is similar to ours. However, that is not the case. Take for instance, the way we listen to music. We are going to assume that the manner by which we listen to music is the same. But an Angolan teenager listens to music that is completely different to ours. They listen to music in a communal fashion for several people to listen to, dance to, and sing along. But in the Philippines, teenagers listen to music alone. When you have no idea about a culture, it might make sense to assume that one culture is different than our own, that we can practice the things that we are doing back at home to a new place. This is wrong. There is an incident in America when a Danish mom left her infant child in a stroller outside McDonald's because it was the natural thing to do for her as a Danish. But the other diners became concerned and called the New York police, and the woman was charged with endangering the child and was jailed for 2 nights. Her child was placed in a foster care. The woman and the Danish consulate explained that leaving children unattended outside cafes is common in Denmark. So remember that each culture is different and unique to some degrees. And in that case, it is better to assume nothing and ask, what are the customs here? The third one is ethnocentrism, or the negatively judging aspect of another culture by the standards of one's own culture. Basically, you are passing judgment on the merits of another culture because you assume that yours is the correct one. To be ethnocentric is to believe in the superiority of your culture. We have this tendency to consider that the culture that we grew up in is the correct one. But if we try to understand another culture, a lot of complexities in that culture would make sense to us. There is another name for ethnocentrism, and that is anthropological concept of cultural relativism. It does not mean that everything is equal, though. It does mean that we have to understand other people's behavior in the context of their culture before we judge it. By the way, the less extreme form of ethnocentrism is called cultural nearsightedness, one that practice that takes one's own culture for granted and neglects other culture. An example of this is how some people in US refer to their citizens American, when in fact the term applies to both North and South American citizens. Why do people practice cultural nearsightedness? It is because people assume that simple things are the same everywhere. There is also what they call Eurocentric ethnocentrism. What is this? They recognize only Western holidays in school or basing curriculums only on Western history, music, and arts. Another thing is the term West and East themselves have been labeled Eurocentric ethnocentrism because if you are going to look at the map, Asia is indeed east of Europe, making Europe the center of its reference. One of the most destructive barriers of intercultural communication is stereotypes and prejudice. Stereotype means a reference to negative or positive judgment made about individuals on any observable or believed group memberships. Prejudice, on the other hand, is the unreasonable suspicion or hatred towards a group, race, or religion. Examples of stereotypes in culture. 1. All white Americans are obese, lazy, and dim-witted. Homer Simpson of the TV series The Simpsons is the personification of these stereotypes. Mexican stereotypes suggest that all Mexicans are lazy and came into America illegally. All Arabs and Muslims are terrorists. Italian and French people are the best lovers. All Asians are good at math. All Asians like to eat rice and drive slow. An example of prejudices are as follows. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, any person of Japanese descent living in America was considered suspects, as prejudices against them grew simply because they had a genetic link to an enemy country. This prejudice led to discrimination, as President Roosevelt has them rounded up and held in internment camps. During apartheid in South Africa, non-whites were viewed as lesser than or inferior to white counterparts based on opinion alone. It is believed that Adolf Hitler came into contact with anti-Semitic ideas at an early age, which fueled his prejudice against Jewish people. Stereotyping means the oversimplified generalizations about groups of people. It was first used by Walter Lippmann, a journalist, to describe judgment made about others on the basis of their ethnic group membership. But now, it is used to refer to judgment made on the basis of group membership. Notice that the definition became broader because before, it refers only to ethnic groups, but now it may refer to any social groups. Psychologists suggest that it is a mistake our brains make in the perception of other people that are similar to those mistakes our brains make in the perception of visual illusion. Take for instance the sign Paris in the spring. We read it as Paris in the spring without even noticing the extra the. In like manner, if we expect a protagonist in a romance movie as a charming young man, we will never see him as someone with a dad bod. Right? All of us has a tendency to stereotype, and almost all of us held a stereotypical belief once. And there's also a difference between cultural sensitivity and ethnic stereotyping. Being open to learning about the tradition and beliefs of other cultures. Being aware of your own culture and how it has influenced you. Examine your own biases and prejudices. Seeking knowledge about other cultures, especially those that you encounter often. Stereotypes are harmful because they stop communication in at least 4 ways. Number 1. They cause us to assume that a widely held belief is true when it is not. Number 2. Continued use of a stereotype enforces the belief. Number 3. Stereotypes also impede communications when they cause us to assume that a widely held belief is true of any one individual. And number 4, the stereotype can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Stereotypes can be positive or negative. I once believed that all accountancy students are both academically excellent and kind people, mainly because I happen to meet students with the same attributes. But compared to that, prejudices are always negative. It is the irrational dislike, suspicion, or hatred of a particular group, race, religion, or sexual orientation. An example of this is the anti-Asian sentiments brewing amongst the citizen in the US. And that's all. Do like and subscribe. Goodbye.